When Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula arrived in 1992, it didn't just adapt Bram Stoker's novel, it reinvented gothic horror as opera, nightmare, and forbidden romance. These are 20 hidden details in Dracula you completely missed. Number 20. Francis Ford Coppola didn't take on Dracula for artistic glory alone. He needed cash to save his struggling Napa Valley winery, bleeding money faster than he could redirect it. Columbia Pictures offered him the project as a commercial lifeline after years of turbulence following Apocalypse Now and One from the Heart. The irony cuts deep. This paycheck gig became one of his most visually audacious films, a gothic fever dream that pushed boundaries most directors wouldn't approach. Financial desperation forced him into a genre he'd previously dismissed. Producer Fred Fuchs later confirmed the Vineyard's financial troubles were a major factor in Coppola accepting the project. Sometimes creative madness is born from economic necessity and unexpected opportunities. Number 19. Winona Ryder didn't just star in Dracula, she initiated it, dragging the script from development purgatory into production reality with pure determination. She brought screenwriter James V. Hart's screenplay to Coppola after recognizing something other adaptations had missed entirely. Ryder was obsessed with the idea of a romantic, tragic Dracula who loved across centuries, not just a monster collecting victims. Coppola was initially reluctant, seeing vampire films as exploitation trash beneath his directorial pedigree, but Ryder's passion convinced him to reimagine it as grand opera, elevating pulp material into something Shakespearean. Hart had spent years developing the script at Columbia before Ryder discovered it. Without her persistence, this film might never have existed. Number 18. Gary Oldman prepared for Dracula by researching silent film legend Lon Chaney, the man of 1,000 faces who pioneered physical transformation in early cinema. Chaney endured hours of painful prosthetics to become monsters in films like The Phantom of the Opera during the 1920s. Oldman wanted that same commitment to physical metamorphosis, that total erasure of self beneath latex and paint. He spent up to 5 hours daily in makeup chairs throughout production, transforming between Dracula's various forms across centuries. Makeup designer Greg Canham supervised the elaborate transformations. Oldman refused a stunt double for most sequences, even the wall-crawling scene where he defied gravity. His performance channels Chaney's philosophy that transformation required physical suffering. Number 17. Despite being released in 1992 when CGI was becoming Hollywood's standard after Terminator 2 proved digital effects could dominate blockbusters, Coppola banned computers entirely from this production. Every visual trick in Dracula was achieved through practical in-camera techniques. The shadow acting independently, Dracula appearing as a bat, the wolf transformation, all mechanical, all physical, all captured on set without digital enhancement. Coppola used Victorian-era cinema tricks inspired by Georges Méliès. He wanted the film to feel like it was made in Dracula's era, as if the movie itself was a relic from the 1890s. Cinematographer Michael Ballhaus shot effects live on set with no post-production safety net. The techniques were ancient. The commitment was absolute. Number 16. Keanu Reeves' attempt at a British accent as Jonathan Harker became infamous, a performance choice mocked by critics and audiences for decades. His wavering, inconsistent delivery shifted between vaguely European and distinctly Californian, never settling into anything resembling authentic pronunciation. Reeves reportedly struggled with dialect coaching throughout production, unable to maintain consistency across long shooting days in Romania and California. Anthony Hopkins and Gary Oldman allegedly had difficulty keeping straight faces during scenes with him, their professionalism barely containing laughter. Coppola defended Reeves publicly, saying the character's naivety suited the performance. But even Reeves later admitted in interviews with Empire magazine that he was miscast, acknowledging the accent became a distraction from the film's gothic atmosphere. Number 15. Anthony Hopkins played Professor Van Helsing as unhinged and unsettling, a man teetering between genius and madness throughout the vampire hunt. He often improvised his strangest line readings, turning exposition into performance art that unsettled everyone on set. The scene where he laughs maniacally while eating wasn't scripted that way originally in James V. Hart's screenplay. Hopkins decided Van Helsing should seem slightly mad, a man who'd seen too many monsters to remain entirely sane. Coppola encouraged this unpredictability, letting Hopkins experiment with bizarre vocal choices and physical tics. The cast never knew what Hopkins would do next, which created genuine tension beyond scripted dialogue. Van Helsing became less a hero, more dangerous fanatic. Number 14. The spectacular opening sequence showing Dracula's 15th century battle against the Turks was filmed in just just one day in California near Coppola's Napa estate. Coppola used a small army of stuntmen, forced perspective, and frantic editing to create the illusion of epic scale on a limited budget. The production couldn't afford weeks of battle scene filming like historical epics demanded. Costume designer Eiko Ishioka created Dracula's red armor specifically to stand out in chaotic wide shots, ensuring Gary Oldman remained visually distinct amid hundreds of extras. The entire prologue establishes Dracula's tragic origin and frames the film's emotional stakes. Second unit coordinators choreographed the battle efficiently, knowing they had no second chances. One day to film, centuries of heartbreak to convey. Number 13. Before Gary Oldman secured the role, Daniel Day-Lewis was seriously considered for Dracula during early development at Columbia Pictures. Day-Lewis was coming off his Oscar win for My Left Foot and was one of Hollywood's most sought-after actors. Producer Fred Fuchs and Coppola discussed approaching him, knowing Day-Lewis's method intensity would bring psychological depth to the vampire count. However, scheduling conflicts with The Last of the Mohicans under director Michael Mann prevented Day-Lewis from committing to the lengthy makeup sessions required. The role eventually went to Oldman, who was less famous then but hungry to prove his range beyond villain roles in JFK. Day-Lewis's Dracula would have been radically different, likely more internal and less theatrical than Oldman's operatic interpretation. Number 12. Sadie Frost's portrayal of Lucy Westenra pushed boundaries with overt intimacy and violent seduction scenes that made executives nervous at early Columbia screenings. Early test screenings reportedly shocked conservative audiences unprepared for Lucy's aggressive carnality and transformation into predatory vampire. Studio head Mark Canton worried the film would receive an NC-17 rating, box office poison in 1992 when most theaters refused to screen adults-only content nationwide. Coppola trimmed some of Lucy's most explicit moments to secure an R rating and wider theatrical release. Even after cuts, Frost's performance remains one of cinema's most brazenly sexual vampire victims. She played Lucy as carnally liberated, not helpless prey. The performance was scandalous then, celebrated now by modern feminist film critics. Number 11. Costume designer Eiko Ishioka created wildly theatrical avant-garde outfits that looked like wearable nightmares, fashioned from fever dreams. Studio executives at Columbia Pictures were horrified when they saw early designs during pre-production, calling them unwearable and too weird for mainstream audiences. Coppola backed Ishioka completely, insisting the film needed operatic costuming that transcended historical accuracy. Dracula's red armor, Mina's green gown, Lucy's white lace, each costume communicates psychology through fabric. Ishioka drew inspiration from Japanese kabuki theater, European Renaissance painting, and Art Nouveau illustration by Alphonse Mucha, synthesizing centuries of visual art. Her work won the Academy Award for Best Costume Design in 1993. The studio executives who doubted her had to applaud the designs they'd called unwearable months earlier. Number 10. One of the film's most unsettling visual tricks is Dracula's shadow moving independently from his body, acting with sinister autonomy throughout castle scenes. This wasn't CGI or optical illusion. It required an actor in black performing synchronized movements separately from Gary Oldman's performance on set at Sony Studios. The shadow performer had to mirror Oldman's actions precisely while adding sinister variations, moving just slightly wrong to create unease. Cinematographer Michael Ballhaus calibrated angles meticulously to composite the shadow into scenes without revealing the trick. Coppola borrowed this technique from FW, Murnau's Nosferatu, and German expressionist cinema, where shadows represented psychological truth. Modern audiences assume it's digital trickery. It's actually old-school theatrical stagecraft captured on film. Number 9. Despite their characters' doomed romance, Gary Oldman and Winona Ryder developed genuine affection during filming that elevated every scene they shared. Ryder later described Oldman in Premiere magazine as protective and generous between takes, supportive when prosthetics made his performance physically grueling. Their scenes together crackle with intensity because both actors committed fully to the tragic love story underneath the horror. Coppola encouraged them to rehearse privately at his Napa estate, building intimacy before cameras rolled. Oldman was unrecognizable under Greg Canham's prosthetics during most of production, so Ryder had to connect with his voice and eyes alone. That limitation forced deeper emotional communication, stripping away physical attraction to find something more essential. Their chemistry elevated Dracula from horror film to gothic romance. Number 8. Special effects supervisor Roman Coppola, Francis's son, created custom blood formulas for different scenes requiring specific visual properties. The blood needed to look vivid on camera under cinematographer Michael Ballhaus's lighting, from candlelit to harsh daylight. Traditional stage blood used by makeup artist Dick Smith in earlier horror films looked too dark or too orange, reading wrong on film stock. Roman mixed red food coloring with corn syrup, adjusting consistency for splatter versus flow effects throughout production. Some scenes required gallons gallons of the mixture, particularly Lucy's death sequence and Dracula's final disintegration. The sticky substance ruined Eiko Ishioka's elaborate costumes and made cleanup nightmarish. But on film, it glows with unnatural vibrancy, blood that looks like operatic paint. Number 7. While most of the film was shot on sound stages at Sony Pictures Studios in California, Coppola insisted on filming some sequences at real locations mentioned in Bram Stoker's novel. The production traveled to Romania to capture Transylvanian landscapes that matched Stoker's geographical descriptions from his 1897 research into Eastern European folklore. They shot exterior castle scenes at actual medieval fortresses near Bran Castle, ancient stone that predated the novel itself by centuries. Production designer Thomas E. Sanders scouted locations that would ground the theatrical studio work in documented reality. Coppola wanted the film to honor Stoker's geographical specificity, proving the author had researched real places despite never visiting Romania personally. These authentic location shots anchor fantasy and documented history effectively. Number 6. Michael Ballhaus studied silent film cinematography extensively before shooting Dracula, researching forgotten techniques from cinema's first decades. He used iris shots, where the frame closes into a circular vignette, common in D.W. Griffith films but abandoned decades ago by Hollywood. Color filters and in-camera transitions mimic techniques from cinema's earliest decades before editing allowed seamless scene changes pioneered by Soviet filmmakers. Ballhaus and Coppola wanted the film to feel like a lost relic from movie-making's infancy, existing outside modern cinematic grammar. This visual anachronism makes Dracula seem older than 1992, like uncovering forbidden footage from another era entirely. Modern audiences sometimes mistake these deliberate choices for dated effects. They're actually sophisticated homages to film history itself, conscious rejection of contemporary technique. Number 5. Musician Tom Waits took the role of Renfield as a conscious homage to Dwight Frye's iconic 1931 performance in the Bela Lugosi Dracula, directed by Todd Browning. Waits studied Frye's bug-eating, manic energy obsessively, understanding that performance defined cinematic madness for generations. He added his own raspy vocal texture and twitchy physicality, making Renfield simultaneously familiar and new. Coppola gave Waits freedom to improvise Renfield's mad rambling, trusting the musician's instincts for rhythm honed through decades of experimental albums. The result is performance art masquerading as a supporting role, Waits turning exposition into musical nightmare. He reportedly stayed partially in character between takes, unnerving the crew with continued muttering around the asylum set. His Renfield is simultaneously pathetic and terrifying. Number 4. When Dracula transforms into a wolf, the effect combines animatronic puppetry with creative editing. No digital morphing whatsoever. Special effects artist Greg Canham, who later won Oscars for Mrs. Doubtfire and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, built mechanical wolf heads and paws operated by hidden technicians. Gary Oldman wore partial prosthetics that blended with the animatronics during transformation shots, his face merging with mechanical elements. The sequence required dozens of takes to synchronize mechanical elements with Oldman's performance, timing breathing and movement perfectly under Michael Ballhaus's camera angles. No digital morphing was available in 1992, at least not for this production's approach. Everything happens through practical makeup application filmed in stages, cuts disguised as seamless transformation. The transformation looks visceral because it's physically constructed. Number 3. Monica Bellucci made her English language film debut as one of Dracula's brides, a small role that introduced her to international audiences beyond Italian cinema. She was relatively unknown in Hollywood in 1992, cast primarily for her striking appearance and screen presence that Coppola recognized immediately. The vampire bride sequence, where they seduce Jonathan Harker in the castle, showcases Bellucci's ability to be beautiful and predatory simultaneously. Coppola shot the scene to feel like erotic nightmare, seduction, and horror inseparable, recalling John Rawlins' European vampire films. Bellucci had minimal dialogue but created lasting impression through physical performance. Years later, she'd become international star in films like Milena and Irreversible, but Dracula introduced her to English-speaking audiences who immediately recognized her magnetic presence. Number 2. Sofia Coppola appears briefly in the film, continuing her father's tradition of casting family members in his productions dating back to the Godfather trilogy. She's visible in crowd scenes and background moments in London sequences, easy to miss unless you're specifically looking. This was years before Sofia became acclaimed director herself, before Lost in Translation won her the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay in 2004. Francis frequently included his children in his films, creating unofficial family filmography across decades from Apocalypse Now to The Godfather Part 3. Sofia's cameo is easy to miss, but dedicated viewers can spot her during Victorian London street scenes. These family inclusions gave Coppola's sets intimate, collaborative atmosphere. Decades later, Sofia would direct Marie Antoinette. Number 1. By 1992, 1992, Dracula had become a campy pop culture icon, far removed from Bram Stoker's novel and literary intentions. Countless adaptations from Universal Studios to Hammer Films had strayed from the source material, emphasizing cheap scares over psychological tragedy. Coppola's film returned to Stoker's text with screenwriter James V. Hart's faithful adaptation, restoring themes of forbidden love and eternal damnation the novel actually explored. The opening credits declare Bram Stoker's Dracula, reclaiming literary origins from decades of exploitation adaptations. Critics like Roger Ebert praised Coppola for treating the novel seriously after decades of diminishment. The film reminded audiences that Dracula was literature before it became a Halloween costume, serious gothic fiction before camp icon status emerged. Sometimes honoring source material is the most radical choice. 3 decades later, Coppola's Dracula remains a fevered dream of practical effects, operatic romance, and gothic grandeur that refuses to fade. It proved you don't need computers to create haunting images, just imagination and commitment to craft that honors cinema's history. Which hidden detail surprised you most, and what film should we open next?